Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome into the Go 24/7 podcast recruiting edition. My name is Bryce Koon alongside Sonny, Shipp. We appreciate you for joining in on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you're consuming this content. Sonny takes a sip from the morning coffee. I haven't had mine yet. I had to work through some technological issues, so I'm going to have to get mine as soon as we get done with this podcast here on Friday morning. But, man, LSU fans, they need a pot of coffee and some after losing Terry Bussey. Sonny, we don't need to harp on this too long, but, I think you made it pretty clear that after the visit last weekend, it's not that people didn't feel great about it. I think he had a good weekend. A chance to kind of see the big game day atmosphere against Arkansas. But really, this one kind of felt like it was not leaning towards LSU the whole time. Your thoughts on that, and then just kind of where this roster stands, because I know there's a lot of worry from this fan base when it comes to the defensive back position.
Yeah, I mean, he's been leaning Texas A&M's way for probably forever, it seems like.
Yeah.
They were one of the first schools to offer him and things like that. So they had the relationships on their side. I mean, proximity to home, it's closer to home, closer to where his, the family is that he lives with and all of that. So A&M had a lot of stuff on his side, and this was going to be a tough pull for LSU. Obviously, from a fan standpoint, they hate to come up, either second, third, whatever they finish with Bussey on a 5-star. And there's been several of them, Colin Simmons, they were right there until the end on Colin Simmons. Obviously, Dominic McKinley, the #1 player in Louisiana. Kobe Black, another 5-star cornerback out of Texas. You toss in Terry Bussey, and that's a lot of coming up second or coming up third or not getting the job done, I guess as the fans put it. And I get it. When you go after those big fish, eventually, you got to pull one in. You got to get that Deshaun Womack. You gotta be able to look and say, okay, all of those recruiting efforts that you put into these kids, that you see a little residual payback from it. And it could still come. It could still come with the transfer portal down the road. But, looking at the near term, I think LSU fans are just kind of sitting there saying, okay, when's our turn? When are we not going to come up second? When are we not going to be the bridesmaid? And so I wish I had an answer. I wish I could look at this list and say, hey, there's a 5-star right there I think you're going to get. But I think you're going to have to wait till that next cycle, that 2025 cycle for that. But from a positional standpoint, if we put Terry Bussey in LSU's cornerback room, it's a cornerback room that has 7 guys in it that can return next year. Obviously, with 4 guys already committed in this class, I don't think you're going to have a cornerback room / nickel room sitting at 11 or even 12, by the time the spring gets here. So the numbers are not at a point to where you look at it and you say, okay, LSU has to get a corner who can come in and play right now, because Zy Alexander and Denver Harris, your 2 starting cornerbacks right now. Denver Harris has 3 years of eligibility left. Zy Alexander has 1 after this year right here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, from a pure numbers and body standpoint, the LSU cornerback room is in good shape. I think what you're looking at, though, is you're saying, okay, is Alexander and Harris going to turn the corner this year to where you feel better about the guys returning next year and you don't feel like you need that impact guy? And I think Alexander and Harris, I think that they will show that improvement throughout the season to where you're going to feel I think fans will feel a lot better about this cornerback class come January, come February, when they see everyone who's coming back, and then you add the new guys into the equation. Because let's face it, Kai Bates, Andre Evans, 2 out-of-state corners coming in. Both of those guys are highly rated. Both of those guys are guys that, you have to feel good about from that perspective. Shawan Johnson, the guy coming in, I think the sky's the limit for him as a nickel, as a corner / nickel, maybe even a safety type. I just think he has a bright future when it comes to that. And then Wallace Foster, he's another guy that when he first started out on the when he first emerged, he started out as a pretty solid 4-star guy. Got hurt last year, returning this year, and so kind of you put a TBD by his name to see how that knee recovers from the injury and whether or not he's able to sustain that recovery without hurting it again this year. But just from an overall perspective, it would be nice if LSU, for those who are unsettled about the cornerback room, you would probably love to add another guy just to add another guy. But I think that room is in a lot better shape than it gets credit for.
Yeah, and one thing you mentioned too with kind of guys having to be developed, like they've got to develop some of these younger guys that you mentioned. I mean, Denver Harris, we're still seeing is a very much an unfinished product when it comes to this. And when he came from A&M, he flashed, he's shown flashes, but he's also shown flashes of youth and, that blissful ignorance, I guess you could say, of just not knowing what you don't know. And I think too, you got to remember you're going to have J.K. Johnson back next year. That's going to be something that, we didn't really get to see much of because he got hurt so early in fall camp. Sonny, how much can you, and this kind of goes along with the fans, you can't just continue to rely on 18-year-olds to perform. You got to develop what's in-house, and that takes time. Like, I think that's something that, a lot of fans don't have the patience for, but I think you've got a nice crop of guys. You add in J.K. Johnson if he gets healthy, and his potential. Then you bring in these guys like you mentioned, and you start to kind of form a room where maybe you can go pick one out of the portal if there's a high-level target, this offseason. I'm with you there. I don't know if the numbers don't add up, and I am excited to see what a guy like Kai Bates can do. Andre Evans, like you mentioned, Wallace Foster, a guy that you also have to – how much of this – and I want to ask you this. We know recruiting rankings, that's the business we're in. How much does the evaluation of what this team has matter more maybe than what the industry standard? I mean, I'm sure these guys, the analysts, the recruiting staff, the coaches, when they're breaking this down, they say, well, you know what? We actually kind of like what Wallace Foster brings and to the group and to this maybe more than someone else out there.
Yeah, well, and that just goes back to where if you get 5 NFL scouts, you bring them to a practice, you have them watch 5 kids, they're probably going to have, there will probably be 3 to 4 different opinions formed on those kids.
Yeah.
And the same thing's going to happen. I mean, when you've got, recruiting analysts, you've got guys who are ranking kids, and then you have the college coaches who are actually, out there offering the kids. Look, this is not a slight against the recruiting industry whatsoever, but I'm not about to sit here and try to convince someone that, us recruiting analysts who rank kids, our word is gospel, because that ain't the case. And look, it ain't the case with all college coaches too. But look, man, college coaches, the college coaches. Take Robert Steeples, for instance. What's he making? $350,000, $400,000 a year? Ain't no recruiting analyst out there making that. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think, I think you have to look at them and you take each measure, but it's just like if you go ask a doctor what one doctor tells you your prognosis is, what another one tells you your prognosis is, probably going to flip back and forth between the two of them, until you get one that you just really feel good about. And so I think that's the case with recruiting rankings, use them as a guide, use them as a metric. But look, at the end of the day, you should feel comfortable enough trusting your position coaches. And I think Brian Kelly does. You look at the coordinators on both sides of the ball, I think they do. And that's not to minimize the recruiting rankings in any way whatsoever. But at the end of the day, that college coach's job depends on those recruiting rankings. There's not many recruiting analysts out there that I know who have been fired because of how they ranked a kid.
Yeah.
Unless the kid didn't exist. And we've seen that a couple of times.
That's true. That's very true.
Sadly, I don't think that person got fired, though.
That's very true. Let's talk about an interesting offer here. Obviously, it plays in the fact that LSU is going to be playing Ole Miss. Current Ole Miss commit Bernard Cossey out of John F. Kennedy. This is a kid that was, had been rumored to be kind of on LSU's radar over the past couple of weeks and months. We've talked about this on the podcast, but that official offer kind of dropped on Wednesday evening, which was kind of weird, I think, for the fans to see, because you knew that Bussey was going to commit the next day. And the offer to Causey comes in the night before. I mean, less than 24 hours before that commitment. I know that you've, kind of been in on Causey as a guy that LSU's looking at. Now that that offer is there, we mentioned there's a numbers game with this. How realistic do you see LSU being able to push and being able to flip Causey from Ole Miss?
Well, you talk about Terry Bussey, and we talk about some of the 5 stars that LSU missed out on. Outside of Dominic McKinley, they're all from outside Louisiana. Now we're talking about a kid from Louisiana. A lot of his friends, a lot of his teammates probably grew up following LSU, talk about LSU. He's friends with some of their commitments. I know Colin Billo, when they had their game a couple of weeks ago, they were taking pictures after the game, chopping it up and stuff. So you can see the relationship that they have. So when you start talking about the numbers game, I think it's easier when if you have a position room that has a lot of people in it. I think it's easier to convince that Louisiana kid than it is to go outside the state and recruit that Texas kid, because you just have a lot of factors. You have a lot of variables at play. You're talking about a New Orleans kid. You've got area recruiters in New Orleans who spend a lot of time in New Orleans, who go by that high school regardless of whether or not they have a prospect or not. You can't say the same for those out-of-state schools, for those out-of-state kids. So I don't think we're comparing apples to apples when we talk about Causey or Bussey, adding them to that room, because I think you have to consider the in-state angle and, the emotions that could carry, and just wanting to be closer to the family. I think that was a huge factor with Terry Bussey, wanting to be closer to the family he's with in Texas. And I think with Causey, if he makes that flip from Ole Miss to LSU, that's going to be a big reason, and that's going to be a big factor. He camped at LSU over the summer, listed at 6 foot 160, probably a little bit under 6 foot, but pretty close to it. Got some decent length. Ran I'm not sure of the exact time, but he ran in the 4.4 range at LSU's camp. I was talking to a source over there who said they love his speed, they love his tenacity, they love how he just likes to mix it up, he likes to get at it and stuff. And when we talk about the timing of the Bussey offer, there's no question that LSU wanted to get that offer to Causey before they played Ole Miss. Because if he makes that trip to Oxford on Saturday, LSU wants him looking at LSU just as much as he's looking at Ole Miss, and especially if LSU comes out of there with the W, So I think that probably had a lot to do with the timing of that offer. Also, with just kind of while Bussey never told LSU no, you eventually you start to get, those good feelings of like, man, I think we got a chance. I think we're looking good. Well, as time slips away and you don't hear anything, those feelings probably start to kind of go, you're waiting on that doctor to give you a call at noon, and all of a sudden it's 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. You're like, oh crap, what's going on, man? And I think that, and so that probably also played into that decision about the offer. But, if Bussey would have surprised and committed to LSU, then, I don't know that offer may have gone out. Strictly from the standpoint of Bussey would likely end up at cornerback and in Baton Rouge. So I think that, that they wanted to get that offer out, but then you just really wanted Causey thinking about LSU while he's down there in the Grove on Saturday.
Yeah, and obviously another guy too, David Johnson over at the Ole Miss's 24/7 site mentioned Jude Foster down right here in Baton Rouge at a Southern lab school. Talk about, we've mentioned this, Sonny. I think you said it every single podcast. This LSU doesn't have a ton of wiggle room right now, unless someone kind of falls off of the decommitment chart or something like that. It kind of feels like they're going to work their way around the edges and maybe, pick a guy that could be kind of one of those fringe guys, a 3-star like that. Have you heard anything about Jude Foster or anything else they want to beef up that offensive line? I know Brad Davis is really, keying in on the guys that he already has. But is there any talk or any chatter about Jude Foster, that current Ole Miss commit?
Oh yeah. He before LSU offered Joe Cryer in late July before the Bayou Splash. Jude Foster's another guy that we mentioned right then. Mentioned it over the summer at campus. He's a guy that they're really looking at, that they're trying to get a better evaluation of. We've mentioned that, Weston Davis, Blake Ivy, some of these guys, it's obvious that they want to add another offensive lineman. And while it's nice to get those edge protectors because you can always slide them inside. I do think LSU needs some more interior help. And with Foster, he's played on the edge for Southern Lab. I think his measurables just speak more to him playing on the inside. And I think he's going to be one to watch. I think he's going to be the one to continue to watch. But I also don't think that Brad Davis is done with a guy like Weston Davis. There was talk that he may take a visit to Texas last weekend. That ended up falling through. Blake Ivy's a guy that, that they're still going to kind of beat the bushes on a little bit because they were so close in it with him. And so I'm not sure that Foster is as close to getting an offer as Causey was, just because I think Brad Davis had a lot of, threw out a lot of lines over the summer to offensive linemen. You had Marcus Maskell who committed to Florida. Some other guys like that they're still in contact with, they're still talking with and stuff, and just trying to keep those lines of communication open because you never know what's going to happen. You never know when when an offensive line coach is going to either get fired or move on. You never know with some of these head coaches who are right on the brink of being on the hot seat or not, how those situations are going to unfold. And so more so than in past years, I think you're going to see LSU really try to tap into that pool of guys that they came up second, they came up third with. So those out-of-state guys, maybe before they turn to that in-state as far as the offensive line goes.
Yeah, no, that makes, that's obviously interesting. Like you mentioned, Maskell, Ivy, Weston Davis, some of these guys that, like you said, it kind of felt like they were right there on the edge. Maskell, and one of those guys that I remember talking to, and he said, look, it's down to LSU and Florida kind of got that edge. But like you mentioned, we don't know what type of coaching movement's going to happen. Maybe an offensive line coach gets a job elsewhere. Maybe that staff gets fired. He's not retained. And now that kid's commitment to said staff might have changed. That's a big conversation. Do you commit to the school or do you commit to the staff?
And boards change.
Watch.
And recruiting boards change. Recruiting boards change.
Do.
When prospects, one thing that Brian Kelly and Frank Wilson, I think they do a really good job of is when they take commitments, when they extend offers, when they have those personal conversations and relationships. I think they do a good job of laying out that, you're committed, but the job is not finished. We expect you to continue to handle your business off the field, on the field. And, kids have, if kids don't get it done in the classroom, they have a chance of coaches moving on, just like if they don't get it done on the field. And so, those boards are going to fluctuate. Those boards are going to change. And, that's why you start to see in, the mid to end of October, November, early December, you start to see guys flip. You start to see guys open things back up. Some of it's because they wanted to open it back up. And then some of it's because they have to open it back up.
Yeah. It's a very, there's a lot of intricacies that go along with this. And like you said, the evaluation process doesn't just end when they, put down that commitment graphic in July or August or something like that, especially into that senior season. A little note that I was able to kind of gather at the game against Arkansas, a lot of commits were there. We obviously talked about, the fact that it would be kind of a loaded weekend. JoJo Stone was there. He was on a scooter. He had a boot on. And he said, unfortunately, he was going to miss the next couple of games, but he planned to be back. And, when you kind of start to look at, I wanted to get to this one more time because I know we've talked about this. You start to look at this wide receiver room. I think they're building some fantastic depth with the guys, the freshman class they have there right now, the option for some of the guys that are, maybe a little bit older to return. And then you kind of look in that 2025 class with a guy like DeCorian Moore. I know we had a question on the board about it, so I wanted you to kind of wrap up today's podcast with this. He's going to take his visits. And first off, I think well deserved. Like if I was in this situation, Sonny, I'd be taking visits just to see what these college football atmospheres look like. How much does the staff of LSU really look into that? And but also understanding this is the #1 kid out of the state of Texas. You'd be foolish to not think the Longhorns, the Aggies, and anyone else is not going to come in and try to flip that over the course of the next year.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, you're talking about a 5-star. You're talking about the #2 wide receiver in the country. And you're also talking about the #1 prospect in Texas.
Yeah.
I mean, Texas, Texas A&M. I mean, they're going to throw they're going to throw the bank at this kid. You know, we know that. I mean, that's just that's just common knowledge. You know, they're going to throw the bank at this kid from NIL opportunities and things like that, as they should. Should. And look, and that young man has every right to go out and to get that bank because he's earned it. You know, he's earned it with what he's done so far and then what he needs to continue to do to obviously earn that. But, you know, we said this from when he committed. He's going to be tough to hold on to. It's going to be tough to hang on to this kid, you know, because when he committed to LSU, NIL was like like such a small factor in that equation.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you hear about the opportunities and stuff, and you say, okay, well, that's good. Well, as you get closer, you know, it's like when you go look at that car for the 4th time and you sit down and talk to that car salesman, eventually you start really getting into the nuts and bolts of these deals, you know?
Yeah.
And so, look, that time's going to come. And when it comes, LSU's going to have to step up. LSU's going to have to step up, and LSU's going to have to make a very nice, attractive package. That's just part of recruiting now. And so, fortunately for them, they've got some time to kind of build up the resources and work some things out on that front. But yeah, that's going to be a big factor, and that's going to be something that they're going to have to be able to overcome. And because Texas A&M, they're not going to be the only ones. You know, there's going to be other schools who are going to do the same thing, you know. And so, you know, will LSU hold on to him? Who knows? That's a TBD. But it's going to be hard to hold on to him. You know, I don't think there's anyone out there who doesn't believe that.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun recruitment to watch. Maybe not if you're an A&M, a Longhorn, or an LSU fan, but I think from a recruiting standpoint, it's going to be one that people are obviously going to watch and continue to keep in mind.
And an expensive recruitment.
Yeah, and an expensive one. And like you said, I mean, people don't like it. It's the nature of what this sport has become, and it just is what it is. I think it's going to be very, very interesting to keep an eye out on. As
you know, Bryce, I always go back to. You tell me one person who's going to interview for a job where money is not one of the, you know, I don't know how many factors some people have when they look at jobs, you know, but I mean, if you've got 3 factors you're considering, money's either 1 or 2.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing. And with recruiting now, that's all it is, because these kids are signing with schools basically as jobs. Yeah. As jobs. You know, they're going there knowing that they are going to get paid, knowing that they're going to get some money from it. And so, you know, you can't, if I raised my kid, if my son was like, oh, I'm not worried about how much, you know, money or anything like that. I'm like, what the hell are you talking about, boy? It's got to be a factor, because it has reality. It's part of life, you know? Yeah. So, but I totally get fans' frustration. You know, there's no level playing field. There's no, you know, each state varies from NIL to NIL. Some states just have so much more money than other states and like that. But I mean, it's an unfair game right now. Will it ever be fair? I don't see how. You know, I have
because if we're honest, Sonny, if we're honest, it wasn't fair before all this came out too, because you still had teams kind of doing this under the table. So now it's just being brought to light, kind of the dirty work that started to happen obviously 5, 10, 15 years ago. So it's never really been a fair game. The public just didn't know so much about it as they do now. I think that's something too.
I love it. I don't have to play stupid. I don't have to play dumb anymore. And we can talk about it. You know, money has always been a big factor in recruiting, you know, but now we can just talk about it. Now it's accepted. acceptable. Now it's not a taboo. Now it's not, oh, you're calling this coach a cheater, or you're calling this school a cheater.
Yeah.
You know, before that's what it was. If you mentioned money, it was like, oh, hell would break loose. And, you know, people would want to call and get you fired and stuff for talking about it or whatnot, you know, for insinuating that they're doing something dirty. And so, you know, the NIL game is what it is, but from a professional standpoint, I'm just glad we can talk about it now. You know, I'm glad we can openly talk about it, and we can openly discuss, look, they got a lot more money than your school does to offer right now. And that's going to be tough to overcome in a lot of situations, you know?
It will be. I know I do agree with you. I do agree with the fans' frustration of how it's unregulated. I think that's an issue for sure. There needs to be some type of rule and regulation, but until then, it's going to continue to run wild the way it has been. And look, you couldn't expect anything different. Go 24/7 podcast, talking recruiting. Good one here with Sonny Shipp. My name's Bryce Koon. Thanks so much for tuning in. LSU with a big one against Ole Miss. If you're on the YouTube channel, if that's the only way that you consume the content, we encourage you to go over to go247.com, 24/7 Sports /LSU for some great content we're going to have over there recruiting wise. All basketball kicked off. I got my first taste of a Kim Mulkey presser, and man, I better have my ducks in a row when I go in there and ask some questions, because she's a stickler, and it's going to be a lot of fun to cover that team. Absolutely dominant.
Coat and tie required.
Coat and
tie next time.
When you write your book or I write my book, I'm definitely including that as a chapter. It's going to be the coat and tie chapter. Sonny Shipp, my name's Bryce Koon. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Go 24/7 podcast.